Welcome to Sounding Board. This is a weekly program produced by club members of Seroptimist International of Novato, California. We have today a very special program that's going to look back into the history of a place that some of you may know very well about, and that is Alcatraz Island. Alcatraz was the prison that was famous nationwide for the gangsters with name recognition that we still remember today. What about Machine Gun Kelly and Stroud, better known as the Birdman of Alcatraz? Or what about Al Capone? Well, can you imagine that we have located two little girls who grew up on Alcatraz? Well, they're no longer little girls because they're nice, mature women now. And they have said that they would be willing to come here today and talk to us about life on Alcatraz. Now, you can go to a lot of history places and find out the history of Alcatraz, but I'll bet you won't find anything like you're going to find today with the life as it was for two little girls living on Alcatraz Island. So I have Mary Marvier and Jean Comerford. So, Mary, since you were the older sister, you were 3 years old, or was it 3 weeks? Oh my goodness. 3 years old when you came to Alcatraz Island. So what brought you, let's set the stage here, what brought you to Alcatraz Island?
We actually lived in the Bronx in New York, and my father worked for a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. They post the job openings on the bulletin board, and he saw an opening for correctional officers on Alcatraz. Both of my parents were East Coast people, my father coming from Connecticut, my mom from New Jersey, and they were real pioneers, and they thought, what a wonderful opportunity to move across the country to California. And my mom worked for Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and she knew that she could transfer because there was a Metropolitan in San Francisco. So my parents sold everything they had and drove across the country. Wow. I was 3 weeks old.
3 weeks old?
3 weeks old.
Oh my gosh.
My older sister was 2.5. Jeannie was not born at the time. And this was before the interstate highway system, and it was also before disposable diapers and formula. So, you know, it was almost like the pioneers coming across the country. I really admired them for their
truly
interest to go that far.
Excellent. Well, Jean, tell us about some of the pros and cons of a family's decision like that. I understand some of the families decided to stay on the mainland and commute over every day for their jobs, but your family decided to live right there on Alcatraz.
Well, when I was born in Children's Hospital in San Francisco, my family was living in the new building, Building C, and my older sister Carol and my sister Mary came to visit in the hospital when I was born, and I came home and lived in there for the next 10 years.
Wow.
So some families, some guards who worked on the island did choose to live in San Francisco, but we had a beautiful building that we lived in, 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, beautiful views. And I think it was very reasonably priced and well furnished. So there were about 60 families that lived on
60 families.
60, yes.
Wow.
And so many of the guards had families and young children. So for us, it was a wonderful place to live.
And so was there social life? What happened?
There was a wonderful social life for children. We had numerous parties. We had Christmas parties, Halloween parties. We had a social hall, which was the old officers club, where we had entertainment. And my sisters and I entertained together in numerous shows and Christmas programs. And we had dances.
But there had to be some disadvantages of living on the island.
Well, one of the disadvantages was you had to take a boat to San Francisco. We did have a very small convenience store where you could buy milk and bread and some canned goods, but the majority of your things had to be brought over from the mainland, which meant you had to carry everything as well. And we lived, as we said, in C building. That was probably a good half-mile walk, or quarter-of-a-mile walk anyway, from the boat dock.
Oh.
A lot of stairs involved. And my mother, in later years, did go back to work and took the boat to San Francisco.
Every day.
Every day.
Day.
So you were always carrying a lot of things in your high heels and your hat and gloves and things they used to wear at that time.
So there were regular boats going across.
We probably had, at the time we lived there, they had a boat schedule, and there were probably about 12 times that the boat left Alcatraz. It went to San Francisco, probably a 10, 12-minute boat ride, depending upon the weather conditions and the water. We docked at Pier 4, which was at the foot of Van Ness Avenue in Fort Mason, right next to Aquatic Park.
Is that there now?
It is actually still there, but it's closed right now. It's right next to Muni Pier, and you see a lot of tourists there that will ride the segways, and a lot of people go out to Muni Pier and fish all the time. But that was where the boat departed from and arrived as well. There was a little building on the dock where people would go in and wait.
Now, was that a restricted boat terminal just for Alcatraz Island?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
So did they do some of the processing of people over there before they went over to Alcatraz? Or?
You always had a guard that would help you on, and you had to have clearance prior to getting on the boat. So not anybody could just walk down there and get on the boat and take the little ride over to Alcatraz.
The boat's captain was also a guard.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So he was also a guard.
Good. Okay. So when were you married? Since you were the oldest daughter? Oh no,
No, we have another sister, Carol, that lives in Auburn.
Okay.
And she's about 2.5 years older. So there's 3 girls. I'm the middle one.
Okay, you're in the middle one. But of the two of you, you were the older one. So when were you first conscious of living in some place that was so different from everybody else?
I think probably when we went to school, and we had times when we had to be late getting to school because of weather conditions, and we went to St. Bridget's on Broadway and Van Ness, which was a parochial school, and we all came to school together as a group, and so if one was late, we were all late.
So did you ever bring friends home with you? I mean, how did that work? I mean, Jean, tell us about you.
Well, I did. I had one guest during the time I lived on Alcatraz that was a boyfriend in first grade.
Oh my!
I went to Sherman School, which was a public school. I couldn't get into St. Bridget's until I was in 3rd grade. But I had a first grade birthday party. We had many birthday parties on Alcatraz Island. It was one of the fun things for children. And my mother had a birthday party for me. And my boyfriend was a guest. His mother must have been very thrilled to go through that process of having him come to Alcatraz.
Did he come alone or with his?
I don't know. I think he came alone. But
was he excited about coming to Alcatraz?
Very excited. And he brought, his mother bought the gift. I'm sure I had a beautiful dress and a pair of yellow Angora socks. I was thrilled.
Still remember that.
What was the process of getting a little kid like that onto Alcatraz Island?
Probably the same as I came once as I brought a German exchange student there when I was in high school, and it was still a prison at that time. And my father had to go through the process of getting permission, clearance, and such. So when we came, we had to be cleared. And
did they have to provide identification cards or anything like that?
I don't know. I don't recall that. I just know that the guards were knew that we were free to come.
Okay.
Yes.
So Mary, you said you went to the Catholic school, but what did the rest of the kids, where did they usually go? Where, the 60 families, were a lot of kids off of Alcatraz.
There were a lot of kids there. The public schools that the children went to were Sherman School, Marina Junior High, and Galileo High School. The parochial kids went to St. Bridget's. St. Bridget's did have a high school until the property became so valuable they sold it and built a hotel there. And then the girls would either go to a presentation. My older sister Carol went to NDV, which was the French school, Notre Dame des Victoires, and that was right next to Metropolitan where my mother worked, so that was convenient.
So the kids went over on the boat together to the mainland, and then they just sort of all splintered off and went to the various schools?
That's right. Due to the schedule of the boat, we had to take the bus to get to school, and we walked to the foot of Van Ness and Bay Street, which was just opposite the Ghirardelli Chocolate Factory, and we caught the bus there. But when we got off of school...
Was it the school bus or the city bus?
No, we took the city bus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And getting off of school, we had so much time that we didn't ever take the bus back. We walked. And
It was downhill.
That's quite a walk from Broadway and Van Ness all the way to the foot
Great.
of the Muni Pier there.
So, Jean, by the time you became a teenager, what was life like? How did it change from when you were a little kid?
Yeah, we moved off the island. I was just turning 10 years old when we moved off the island. We moved to San Francisco, and my father transferred. He became, instead of a guard, he had an opportunity to go on to become warden, but my mother had lived there for 13 years and just didn't want to live on the island any longer. So he transferred, became a U.S. Deputy Marshal in San Francisco. So we were never teenagers on the island, but that was one of the disadvantages I go back every year to the island. We have a reunion for Alcatraz alumni. The Park Service invites us, and when we speak to the public, those who were teenagers always talk about their teenage years. And the disadvantages were that they had only one telephone we had island telephone service, but to call out away from the island, there was only one telephone. One telephone. So it was very difficult for teenagers to talk to their friends.
Where was this telephone on the island?
Where was it?
The telephone was on 64 building on the first level. It was right next to the canteen and the post office. And it was the payphone that you don't see too much of anymore that had the door. And I think it used to be 10 cents to make a phone call.
So everybody was standing in line?
Everybody would stand in line. If you were waiting for a call, you would give them that number and you'd stand there and somebody would say, I'll call you at 4 o'clock. You were outside of that telephone at 4 o'clock to catch that phone call.
So for any teenagers who love to talk on the phone, that was a real hardship.
That was impossible. And the other hardship was dating. When they dated or had a dance or in a big event in the city, if they missed that last boat, the last main boat was 10:30, but there was a final boat that came at midnight, I believe. I think it was 10. I thought it was 10:30. But anyway, if they missed that final boat, they were out of luck. They had to stay in the city all night long. So that was difficult for teenagers.
Big trouble, huh?
Yeah.
So what did kids do most of the time on the island? I mean, older kids, even though you left when you were about...
We had... Of course, it used to be an army base prior to that, so there was a lot of cement, and that was called the parade ground. We had the large parade ground, and in the center was a handball court, and right next to that was a play area, quite a large play area that was sand with a seesaw and swings. And then in front of the handball court, we had parallel bars that I was very good at.
Oh, good.
Yeah. We roller skated. That was the days when you had the skate key, and you always wore the skate key around your neck.
So with a huge concrete platform,
huge platform, so you went down on your knees quite a bit. You had Band-Aids and all kinds of little
boys would put up sails and they'd parasail across the island. That was great fun.
We played marbles a lot. And jacks. When bicycles were allowed, we all had bicycles and we rode them. A lot of hide and go seek.
Oh, really?
Because, there were great places to hide. In the front of the apartment buildings, we had great big hydrangea bushes, and of course a lot of cactus, and a lot of sour grass. I remember the sour grass because we all loved it.
And lots of fishing. Boys did a lot of fishing on the island. They had a wonderful time fishing.
And what about dances and things like that? Did they have a lot of dances?
My sister Carol went to one very huge dance, which we thought she was dressed in a formal attire with a tiara, and she was 13 years old.
13.
She had a date that was brought.
13.
Ken Stone was his name. He came from San Francisco to escort her to the dance.
Nice.
Most of the children at the dance were local from the island. Yeah, that was all. That took place in our social hall. So we had our social hall. We had two bowling lanes downstairs. We had a soda fountain. We had a stage where we had all of our entertainment, and we had, dinners and all kinds of events. We really were a very tight-knit community that really provided for fun and entertainment for the children and for the adults as well.
Now you said something that you were one of the first families to get a television.
We were. There was one couple that got a television that, of course, had no children. We were one of the first that had children. And every single night, every night, we had about 30 kids on our living room floor.
Oh,
and my
gosh.
mother worked at the time.
Oh,
so
dear.
she would have to come home, fix dinner, and then have 30 kids on the living room floor. And that went on for a period of time. I can't tell you exactly how long, until somebody got either chewing gum or black tar on our carpet. And my mother said, enough. And then one by one, people started
She
getting
put a sign on the
television.
door, no kids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was the end. But by then, other families were beginning to get televisions of their own. So,
So did you ever interact with any of the prisoners?
yes.
Did you?
Yes, we did.
Tell us about that.
We I knew a couple by name that I recall to this day, Pat and Flat Top. But we would talk to them they would do various jobs around the island, repair this, repair that, paint that, do services. There was always a guard with every 2 prisoners that were there. But also prisoners came in and picked up our garbage.
They came into your house.
Actually, one came right into our kitchen.
Interesting. With a guard?
No, I don't know. I just remember my cousin Jim. His favorite story was Jim Cunningham. He was here. He spent 2 summers with us from the East Coast, and he said to my mother one day, "Monica, there's someone in our kitchen." And she said, "Oh, that's just a prisoner." He was coming to pick up the garbage.
Isn't that
They also delivered milk bottles to our door, our outside, and
They did our laundry as well. So
They did.
they would pick up the laundry and deliver the laundry. Mm-hmm. And the laundry, we all had I remember that our number was either 368 or 378, and that number was stamped on each article of clothing. And everything was folded and then wrapped in paper with a string around it when you got it back.
My father always told us we had our laundry done extra special because we had 3 little girls, and they just seemed to enjoy us.
Well, Jean, you said one time that you mentioned that you're taking the foreign exchange student back for a visit to Alcatraz when you were 17. What went through your mind at that time?
Well, interestingly enough, growing up in Alcatraz, I loved the island. I just loved it. And our views were so great. I thought one side of the world was San Francisco and the other side of the world was the East Bay, and we lived in the center of the world, and it was grand. But, and we had friends, and I was heartbroken at first to leave until I met new friends in the city. But when I came back as a senior in high school and brought my German exchange student friend Herta to show her the island, I was shocked by how desolate it seemed.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know people. I was a guest, an outsider, and it just looked like a prison.
Yeah.
It was quiet. I was embarrassed to think I lived there.
How about you? Did you go back for a visit?
I did not go back until the National Park Service invited us back for a Halloween party. This was before they started giving tours. And my husband and my 4 children came with us, and I was absolutely devastated by what I saw, because nothing that we remember was there.
The building was
The
gone.
buildings were torn down. There were piles of rubble.
Oh, how
Everything
sad.
looked like it was in such disrepair.
Oh.
I have gone back really only about 4 times since to 2 of the reunions, and then I just recently, last October, brought my 6 grandchildren over there. And the Park Service has done a terrific job.
Good.
They really give a wonderful tour, and they've made some repairs to the island. This year that we went, they opened the laundry building, and they have a fabulous photo exhibit there,
Good.
which shows what the island was like when we lived there. It shows our apartment building, it shows the inside of some of the buildings where the prisoners worked, and that was really a plus. So every time that you go, it's a little bit nicer than the time before.
Good. Well, in 1946, there was something known as the riot of 1946, and you were there at that time. Tell us what happened.
That was actually referred to as the Battle of Alcatraz. Battle of Alcatraz.
Ooh.
And I was 11 days short of 5 years old. I was playing on the little parade ground, and all of the kids were out there playing, and we heard a whistle go off. Well, we had a whistle that went off every single day at 12. That indicated that it was a noontime. And this was shortly after. It was actually about 2 o'clock, 2:10 that went off. But we're little kids, we didn't pay any attention to it. We just figured it was a whistle. And then one of the mothers knew what was going on. That was a signal that there was trouble in the cell house. And she grabbed all of us children and called my mother and said that I was safe, that she had me. And my mother had to come from the 3rd floor of our building all the way across the parade ground to try and get me. And Jeannie was just 2 years old, and she was sleeping at the time. When my mother came down to 64 building to get me, one of the ladies that lived there popped her head in, and she said, "Jim has just been shot."
Your father.
Jim being my father. My father was the dock tower guard that was in the
Way up on
the top there. And that's all 360-degree glass. And he was shot at from the prison. And he immediately dropped to the floor and stayed there. And we found him. My mother and I walked up to the 2nd balcony and were able to communicate with him. And he said, "I'm all right. Just get home as quickly as you can."
So he was playing dead up there.
He was playing dead, and he had to stay that way for quite some time because
Until dark.
Until dark. Oh my gosh. Then he snuck down after dark?
From what I understand, he didn't come down until the next day because that riot went on for almost 3 days.
3 days. And so you had to stay inside?
We did make it across the parade ground. My older sister Carol, who was probably 7 at the time, was in San Francisco at the time.
At school?
Well, she was at school, and all of the children had come from school to the dock, and there were mothers that met the children because they were all so young. And they found out that there was trouble on the island, and of course there was no way to get in touch with the island because of the communications that were going on. Every time you'd call, they wouldn't pick up the phone. So here were the mothers with about 40, 46 kids at the dock. And one of the mothers got the brilliant idea of calling the Red Cross for some assistance. And the Red Cross did come down with a bus, and they picked up the mothers and the children, and they put them in a hotel and fed them. But the mothers on the island didn't know what was happening because of the lack of communications. It was a
one
frightful
telephone
time.
line, right?
Very frightful
that was
time.
The whole thing. So was there any communication on this telephone line?
Well, no. The mothers were not able to get in touch with the island. Everything they heard was through the radio.
And I think you said earlier that a reporter or something was
there at the pier, on Pier 4, where the children and the mothers were. There was one pay telephone, and at the time of the riot, all of the newspapers sent their reporters down there. So one of the reporters got in the telephone booth and would not get out of there. Well, the mothers had called the Red Cross and gave them that number, and they were frantically waiting for that telephone call. When the reporter wouldn't get off, one of the Army our officers was there, and they explained their plight to the Army officer, and he went and asked the reporter to get out of the phone booth, and he wouldn't. So he just physically grabbed him by the collar and took him out and said to the mothers, "The phone is yours until they call." And then the Red Cross called a few minutes after that.
So it must have been really scary for the moms, especially, with their children not knowing what was.
We were home. I was asleep in my crib when the siren went off, and a neighbor came and took care of me until my mother and Mary got back home. But yeah, they had to stay away from the windows because of the gunshot that they thought could continue, and they didn't know.
You could hear the gunshot?
Apparently. Oh,
Yes, you could. I do remember hearing them, but I was short. I was,
couldn't see out the window.
I couldn't see out the window. But my mother had written a letter to her sister in New Jersey and recounted a lot of the facts, and did say that
was good.
where the riot had actually broken out, it was in the area facing the Golden Gate Bridge. So from our kitchen window, she had a good vantage point of what was going on.
And there were no prisoners did escape. The three that held out took 3 days before they were finally
They
dead.
were killed.
They were killed. But they were unable, because they didn't have the key, they were unable to get out of the prison. There could have been a danger for us, the residents, had they escaped, but they were unable to get out of the prison. So all the gunfire and all the commotion, the Marines came in, and everything to end that took time. So people from San Francisco could hear the gunfire, and it was making the national news. Everyone all over the country heard about it. But it finally
lasted 3 days.
It lasted 3 days.
Oh, that must have been terrible.
So it was most traumatic for the kids who couldn't come home.
Really?
But for us, and Mary and I, once we were home, we felt we were safe. Except 2 guards were killed in the riot, and one of them lived upstairs from us.
Mr. Miller lived upstairs from us, and a Mr. Stites, and they're not sure whether they were killed by friendly gunfire or what exactly happened, because the Marines came over. They dropped tear gas bombs through holes they had drilled in the ceiling, and it did go on for just about 3 days. It was.
But except for this time, the Battle of Alcatraz for 3 days, it was a very safe environment.
We felt totally safe because our fathers were guards, and their whole job was to protect us and look out for us. So we felt very safe. We never locked our doors.
Never.
So if you would like to leave any last-minute thoughts with our viewing audience, what would it be?
It was a terrific place to grow up. I don't think I'd want to live there as a teenager, but at the time we lived there, you couldn't ask for a nicer home.
Yeah. How about you, Jean?
I loved it. As a child, I think it was a wonderful place. Being on an island, we had a very wonderful friends, a wonderful community of folks, really some decent, very caring people. So we just thought it was wonderful. We learned that we didn't want to break laws. We never wanted to have to go to prison. But as children, we were well taken care of, and we have wonderful memories of Alcatraz.
You guys, the two of you have been absolutely fabulous guests. So thank you for being here. And thank you, Seroptimus members, for being crew. And thank you, Leon, our engineer, for making us look so fabulous. And thank you, the Buck Institute, Research on Aging, for having us, enabling us to use this beautiful television studio. But most of all, thank you, our viewing audience.